Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Shakir, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, talking about my Week 5 wide receiver rankings for the 2025 fantasy football season, going over my top 36 wide receiver rankings. If you're looking for my thoughts on a specific player, be sure to travel down to the description of the video as there are timestamps available there. Again, while you're down in the description, if you have not yet already, of course, subscribe to the channel as I'm making daily fantasy football content with the singular goal of trying to help you capture a 2025 fantasy football championship. Thank you very much. All right, let's begin with the wide receiver conversation in regards to matchups based on receiving statistics allowed between weeks 1 through 4 of the season thus far, and how that implies the potential of being able to identify the most advantageous matchups going into week 5. As you guys can see, the Dallas Cowboys, Indianapolis Colts, Raiders, Giants, Ravens, etc. are the most advantageous matchups going into the given week based on receptions, receiving yards, and receiving touchdowns allowed thus far this season. Now, over the course of today's episode, I will be referencing back to these statistics, but I wanted to go ahead and just share them first and foremost to get an understanding as to the most advantageous and, of course, the most disadvantageous matchups going into the given week. Of course, the Carolina Panthers, Vikings, Seahawks, 49ers, etc. of course, have played incredibly well against the opposing wide receivers thus far. Now, before I get into talking about my top 36 wide receivers, a quick reminder for those of you guys who want my all-encompassing rankings every single Sunday morning for the remainder of the season, travel down to the description and check out Betr. Not only am I partnering with them for the entirety of the season to provide plays, but also provide Sunday morning rankings. So if you sign up today using code Andrew, make that first time deposit minimum of 10 and make a first time play within a real cash play minimum of $1, you'll be eligible to get those rankings sent from my email directly to yours every single Sunday morning. Check your spam folder. These rankings are by position, by tier, half PPR and full PPR, includes flex to get all those questions answered, and of course get your lineup set for the upcoming weekends, as many of us are dealing with injuries and of course upcoming bye weeks. Again, if you sign up today using code Andrew, you get a free $10. So check out the map to the right side of the screen to determine your eligibility based on your current location. Thank you very much. All right, let's begin my top 36 rankings with our number 1, Puka Nacua. Again, this Thursday night matchup is going to be a one-sided affair for sure, considering prior to the recording of this video, there was a confirmation that Brock Purdy, Ricky Pearsall, and Jawan Jennings are all out. But when we want to talk about the Rams and Puka Nacua and what he's been able to accomplish thus far this season and where he is trending, when we compare Puka Nacua's weeks 1 through 4 to Cooper Kupp in 2021 when he won the Triple Crown, Cooper Kupp for the first 4 weeks had put up 87.6 fantasy points in the first 4 weeks in a half PPR. Thus far this season, Puka Nacua has outscored him with 88.5 points. The pace that he is currently on is ridiculous. It's over 200 yard targets. It's over 2,100 receiving yards. It is ridiculous numbers. And we already know that he's matchup proof when he's getting 12.5 targets per game on average thus far this season. Expect him to ball out on Thursday night in a one-sided affair. Number 2, the only other player I wanted to include today within the S tier is Amon-Ra St. Brown. He's coming off of 3 consecutive games of a receiving touchdown and multiple games thus far this season in which he has multi-touchdown games. This is already leaning in the direction of the upcoming matchup against the Cincinnati Bengals being a one-sided affair as well, as the Cincinnati Bengals are 10-point underdogs within the matchup at home. This is going to be a game in which the Lions could very easily put up 50 points. This is the makings for one of those kind of contests in which the Lions don't take their foot off the gas and absolutely annihilate a Cincinnati Bengals defense, sending a message to the entire league. Again, the Bengals thus far this season are the 10th best matchup at the wide receiver position, allowing nearly 28 fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers. So expect a lot of potential for upside from Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jameson Williams this week. Number 3, to begin the A tier, we have Jaxon Smith-Njigba, who had a very underwhelming week 4 performance, and that's primarily due to the fact that they had a short week playing on a Thursday night game, in which, of course, it was a positive game script. Early in that game, the Seattle Seahawks took a lead and were running the ball consistently. And there's a reason why Jaxon Smith-Njigba had 0 receptions at the end of the first half, but he did get himself some rushing utilization, which we had not seen before within this offense, but hopefully will continue to be a part of his overall opportunity share of getting more touches. Nonetheless, in the second half of that game, 4 receptions, 79 yards. That kind of production, in my mind, is what we should expect every half out of Jaxon Smith-Njigba. So if this upcoming week he's able to get himself 8 receptions, 100 plus yards, it wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility, as he has accomplished that on multiple occasions already thus far this season. Taking on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, they've given up their fair share of points to opposing wide receivers lately. Of course, Garrett Wilson, 10 for 84 and a touchdown. Nico Collins, 52 and a touchdown. Drake London, 8 catches for 55 and dropped a touchdown in that game. There's a lot of potential for JSN this week to get back on track as a top-tier receiver. Number 4, speaking of top tier receivers, we have Justin Jefferson taking on the Cleveland Browns, coming off of a very promising showing with Carson Wentz, taking on the Pittsburgh Steelers, 11 targets, 10 catches, 126. A lot of that damage done in the first half and really was a quiet contributor in the second half, but hopefully they'll be able to address that and have him contributing for the entirety of all 4 quarters on a consistent rate. Already we know that the Browns' run-stop defense is elite and their pass rush has played incredibly well thus far this season, but in terms of their secondary, they have tried to mask it with their pass rush. They're giving up the 15th most points to opposing wide receivers, 26 fantasy points per game and a half PPR. So we're hoping that Justin Jefferson, Addison should be in a position to succeed with Carson Wentz in another consecutive week in which he is getting first team reps. Of course, building his comfortability and his rapport with Justin Jefferson. Number 5, we have Garrett Wilson, who has the easiest matchup of the week, taking on the Dallas Cowboys secondary, allowing over 41 fantasy points per game. And as we know, the New York Jets don't have any other contributing wide receivers. So the value that Garrett Wilson could potentially attain this week is incredibly high based on what the matchup and game script is going to imply, based on what the score of this game ends up being. Considering the Jets did not look great the other night, of course, have fumbled away many of opportunities, there's a possibility that they could get into a negative game script and have to look towards Garrett Wilson for the entirety of a second half. We've most recently seen the wide receivers of the Giants, 19 catches, 370 and 3 touchdowns against the Cowboys. The Chicago Bears wide receivers, 13 catches, 208 and 3 touchdowns. Romeo Doubs this most recent week came away with 6 catches on 8 targets, 58 and 3 touchdowns. Why not Garrett Wilson? Again, we have seen Justin Fields support him to being a wide receiver 1 thus far this season, just like he did DJ Moore in 2023. So expect for a lot of success this week. Number 6, we have George Pickens. In this same matchup, I'm expecting a potentially high-scoring game between these two teams, even though the New York Jets offense is very much so run-heavy. I'm expecting both of these offenses to be able to score, as these defenses haven't been playing well. And considering the opportunity share that George Pickens has been exposed to as of late, the last 3 weeks, 9, 9, and 11 targets, has scored 1 receiving touchdown minimum in each of those 3 games. The Jets' secondary matchup isn't the greatest because typically, again, there's always the possibility of seeing Sauce Gardner on a specific side of the field, but he's not going to shadow George Pickens, or I don't expect him to, as he hasn't done that with many receivers over the course of this season thus far. Therefore, we would anticipate for George Pickens to be, of course, finding himself success in the opportunities in which he is given, which should be close to 10 targets within the upcoming week, and hopefully finding himself in the end zone this week once again. Number 7, to begin the B tier, we have Nico Collins taking on the Baltimore Ravens. Look, the Baltimore Ravens offensively and defensively, their injuries continue to stack up, which only continues to provide an advantage for this Houston Texans offense. The Ravens thus far this season are one of the worst defenses in the league and are allowing the 5th most fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers, nearly 31 fantasy points per game in a half PPR. Recently, the Kansas City wide receivers all found success, 2 of which scored touchdowns, but in terms of the overall contributions, 13 catches for 168. Amon-Ra St. Brown went for 7 for 77 and a touchdown. Keon Coleman back in week 1, 8 for 112 and a touchdown. There's so much upside for someone like Nico Collins. Just needs more opportunity share in comparison to what he saw last week in which he saw only 6 targets, but that was primarily because they shut out the Tennessee Titans. This game should be a lot more in his favor in terms of opportunity looks. Let's move on to our number 8, Quentin Johnston, the thumbnail of today's episode. Look, the fact of the matter is he is undeniable. He is ranked thus far this season as wide receiver 2, 18, 24, and 7 in the last 4 games. He's number 2 amongst all wide receivers in air yards, number 8 in terms of yards after the catch, and he's been able to garner a 24% target share within this offense, and now has an opportunity of taking on the 8th best matchup at the position, the Washington Commanders defense, who allowed Drake London 8 catches for 110 and a touchdown. Trey Tucker, 8 for 145 and 3 touchdowns. Romeo Doubs, 28 and a touchdown. Why not Quentin Johnston to continue to be the number 1 receiving option of this Chargers offense, who continue to find themselves in many successful situations? Number 9, we have Emeka Egbuka, the rookie wide receiver who's taking on the Seattle Seahawks. Even though the Seattle Seahawks matchup technically is the 3rd toughest at the wide receiver position based on fantasy points allowed thus far this season, it's not like we haven't seen other wide receivers succeed. Marvin Harrison this most recent week, 66 and a touchdown. Olave had 10 catches for 57. Metcalf scored a touchdown. Pearsall in week 1 went for over 100 receiving yards. Success can be found, but again, it hasn't been done at an extreme rate considering the offenses that have taken on the Seattle Seahawks thus far this season haven't had more than 1 relevant receiver. Again, like I mentioned, Harrison, Olave, Metcalf, and Pearsall. So when we talk about the potential of Emeka Egbuka, I think getting away from the Quinyon Mitchell matchup from this most recent week is going to open up even more possibilities for him. Even though he is coming away with 4 catches for 101 and a touchdown, and he has a knack for scoring touchdowns over the course of his career thus far, it's primarily because Baker Mayfield has thrown 2+ touchdowns in 9 of the last 10 games he has played, regular or postseason. Therefore, if someone's going to catch a touchdown within this offense, it's either going to be Bucky Irving, Emeka Egbuka, or probably Chris Godwin. And considering Bucky Irving is going to be missing some time, there's a lot of potential for Emeka Egbuka this week to find himself in the end zone once again. Number 10, we have Davante Adams. Speaking of finding himself in the end zone, that is purely how he has made his entire season of production. Again, he is scoring weekly touchdowns. He is the number 1 red zone threat of the Los Angeles Rams offense, an offense that continues to find themselves in successful situations. As of right now, with the confirmation that Purdy, Pearsall, and Jennings are out, there should be a lot of opportunities for this offense to continuously give themselves situations to where they are approaching the red zone and finding themselves scoring touchdowns. Expect for Adams to find the end zone this upcoming Thursday, and if he's not able to do that, I would be surprised, considering in 4 of the last 5 games that he has played against the 49ers, he has had 130 or more receiving yards, and in 5 of the last 5 games against the 49ers, he has found the end zone at least once in those contests. For some reason, he just plays incredibly well against the 49ers. Our number 11 to close out this B tier is Deebo Samuel. I'm not 100% certain as to what the status of Terry McLaurin is. I would assume that Terry McLaurin may have another week out, but Jaden Daniels is expected to be cleared and potentially playing this week. And if that's going to be the case, we'll be able to get Deebo Samuel back on track, despite the fact that he is coming off of a week in which he played well, scored 17 fantasy points, scored a receiving touchdown on 6 receptions, 72 yards, incredible numbers, but none of the receptions that he was able to garner this most recent week were behind the line of scrimmage. And that's primarily because he stopped playing in the slot receiving role and has actually moved out wide. Once Terry McLaurin comes back, it'll provide a little bit more opportunity for Deebo Samuel to be the slot receiving option of this offense, which he finds far more success within. But nonetheless, taking on the Los Angeles Chargers should be a high-scoring affair between these two teams. I'm excited for Deebo's upside. Number 12 is Ja'Marr Chase. Look, the fact of the matter is I can't keep him outside of my top 12 rankings. I would feel sick to my stomach if I was at any point ranking him so low to where I have to bench him because I have Johnston, Egbuka, and Adams. But the fact of the matter is Ja'Marr Chase, it's really difficult to rank him considering we don't expect much out of this offense. They're taking on a Detroit Lions secondary that can be taken advantage of, but this offensive line and Jake Browning are not doing themselves any favors. So even though there is a negative game script guaranteed, and there's a possibility of Ja'Marr Chase catching the ball 6 or 7 times this upcoming week, if he's not scoring a touchdown, if he's not eclipsing over 100 receiving yards, really, is he worth the play, to which we continue to have to move him down until we can see some signs of life from the Cincinnati offensive approach. Number 13. We have Michael Pittman Jr. coming off of another week in which he had himself a lot of opportunity share. He's ranked thus far this season in the 3 weeks in which he has scored a touchdown as the number 8, 11, and 22 overall wide receiver. So, of course, he continues to be in this same conversation and deserves it, considering he is the number 1 receiving option of the Indianapolis Colts offense that has played incredibly well. But the only thing that's a little bit sketchy about him is that, yes, he has scored 3 touchdowns this season, and he only has 1 red zone target. So it does provide a little bit of risk there. But nonetheless, this week, taking on the 3rd best matchup, the Raiders, who have given up 4 catches, 69 and a touchdown to Odunze, 3 for 71 and a touchdown to Quentin Johnston, 5 for 61 and a touchdown to Keenan Allen. Many of wide receivers have found success, so Michael Pittman Jr. is the next man up within the matchup to find success out wide for the Indianapolis Colts. And of course, being the number 1 receiving target of Daniel Jones. Number 14, we have Xavier Worthy, who's coming off a very solid week of 14.6 fantasy points in his first week back from the shoulder injury, combining for 121 total yards, whether it's on the ground or through the air. Now, in this most recent week, there were 3 Chiefs wide receivers that eclipsed 11 fantasy points in a half PPR, but Worthy is clearing away the number 1 amongst them. Over the course of the last 11 games that Xavier Worthy has played, 7 of those games totaling 65 or more yards, and 6 of those 11 games consisting of 1 minimum rushing or receiving touchdown. Therefore, going into this week, taking on the Jacksonville Jaguars, as long as he's going to continue to maintain as the number 1 receiving option of this Kansas City offense until the return of Rashee Rice, expect him to continue to be in this top 16 conversation on a pretty consistent basis. Number 15, we have Marvin Harrison Jr., who's coming off of a double-digit target week and hopefully is going to be able to bounce back and build some more confidence as we proceed, as he'll have an advantageous matchup against the Titans, allowing the 7th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. To be specific, it's 29.4 fantasy points per game in a half PPR, which is 13 receptions per game on average, 168 receiving yards, and 1 receiving touchdown allowed per game by the Tennessee Titans secondary and defense. Therefore, Marvin Harrison has himself a great opportunity considering there isn't much receiving competition outside of Trey McBride within this offense. And considering the Cardinals running back injuries that have been designated earlier today, Trey Benson, arthroscopic knee surgery, he will be out for 4 to 6 weeks. James Conner, of course, out for the season. Michael Carter is the pickup, FYI. But in regards to the lacking of a running game, it could lead to even more opportunity for Marvin Harrison in the receiving category against a secondary that has struggled mightily. Our number 16 is Courtland Sutton. Look, Courtland Sutton has been a top 13 ranked wide receiver in 3 of the first 4 games he has played thus far this season because he consistently finds himself in the end zone. 12 of his last 14 regular season starts, 10 or more fantasy points. All 12 of those games in which he has had 10 or more fantasy points, he has been a top 31 ranked wide receiver in fantasy. 7 of those 12 games being top 13th ranked. Even though this week I have him at my number 16 overall rank, it's primarily because of Quinyon Mitchell, the number 1 cornerback of the Philadelphia Eagles, who has given many of wide receivers struggles, not only this season, but also in 2024, his rookie campaign. Nonetheless, Courtland Sutton, as the number 1 receiving option in this offense, he's going to be given his opportunity. If he finds himself in the end zone, of course, he'll be as our number 16. In the event in which he struggles, I still have to fire him up because of how much potential for upside he continues to have on a weekly basis. Number 17 is Jaylen Waddle. Look, in this most recent 3 games, he has had 6 targets every single game consistently, which again isn't the kind of opportunity share that we wanted to see out of Waddle. But now he has an opportunity of taking over the number 1 wide receiver role of the Miami Dolphins offense in the absence of Tyreek Hill, who of course sustained an unfortunate season-ending injury on Monday night. This is going to provide a bunch of opportunity. And over the course of the last 2 seasons, 2023 and 2024, in games in which Jaylen Waddle has been given 8 to 12 targets, there have been 12 games in terms of those instances. He's averaging over 14 fantasy points per game in a half PPR scoring format. That's the kind of level of production that I am hoping to continue to see out of Jaylen Waddle, under the assumption that Tua Tagovailoa will accurately target him on a consistent enough basis to get him into this overall conversation as we proceed. Number 18 to close out this tier is AJ Brown. The squeaky wheel gets the oil. Earlier today, I went back and I watched a video that I posted 2 years ago on the channel. It was week 3 wide receiver rankings. And I talked about A.J. Brown having a tantrum on the sideline after the Minnesota Vikings matchup in which they had, where the Eagles ran the ball quite literally 48 times in comparison to 22 passing attempts. And of course, that's why A.J. Brown had himself a meltdown on the sideline. The squeaky wheel gets the oil because back in 2023 when that happened, from the consecutive weeks of weeks 3 through 8 of the 2023 season, A.J. Brown had 6 consecutive games of 125 or more receiving yards. That's what we're hoping to see in the short term. We're hoping to see him get back into the mix and being utilized at an incredibly high, clip. But this week, they're taking on the Broncos, which isn't the greatest overall matchup. He could very easily crash out on the sideline this week. Best case scenario, of course, the Denver Broncos take an early enough lead to force the Eagles to have to pass the ball and look in the direction of A.J. Brown, but I'm certainly still trading for him because you can get him at an all-time low value. Number 19, we have Keenan Allen. Look, Keenan Allen has played incredibly well over the course of his career, but he only needs 2 receptions to surpass the coveted 1,000 receptions, which only 15 other wide receivers have been able to accomplish thus far in the National Football League's history. Again, as long as he continues to still out-target Lad McConkey, and he's still establishing himself as the number 2 receiving option of this offense, taking on the 8th best matchup at the position, the Washington Commanders, allowing 28 fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers. Like I mentioned before, London, Tucker, Dobbs all scoring touchdowns, but London and Tucker in these most recent weeks going for over 100. I'm assuming Quentin Johnston will find a lot of success, especially in the deep ball receiving game, but in terms of moving, the chains, getting the ball out of your hands quickly because of the offensive line struggles and injuries that they have accrued over the course of the coming weeks, I do anticipate a lot of upside for someone like Keenan Allen this week. Number 20, we have Chris Olave. Still is at the top of the wide receiver conversation in terms of total targets, despite this most recent week of only 6 targets. Luckily, he was able to score a touchdown, even though he dropped one in week 3. Should have been back-to-back weeks of a touchdown, but nonetheless, as long as Spencer Rattler is out there, they're going to continue to look in the direction of Chris Olave as their number 1 wide receiver. And when you have an opportunity of taking on the Giants, the 4th best matchup at the position, allowing nearly 32 fantasy points per game on average, Johnston this most recent week, 8 for 98 and a touchdown. Thornton, 5 for 71 and a touchdown. Pickens, 5 for 68 and a touchdown. Everybody is scoring against them. So we're hoping this is going to be a high-scoring matchup between 2 bad teams this week in the Superdome. Number 21, we have Jakobi Meyers, who in week 2 had 12 total targets. And in the last 2 weeks, he's combined for only 11 targets. His opportunity share has diminished greatly, and so has his fantasy point contributions. Now, hopefully this week, in a negative game script, taking on the Indianapolis Colts, it's going to force them to have to throw the ball for majority of the second half and hopefully look in the direction of someone like Jakobi Meyers and or Brock Bowers, who have been incredibly underwhelming over the course of the last 2 games. I understand in this most recent week, the running game of the Las Vegas Raiders and Genti really were the contributing factors for that offense, but we're hoping for far more opportunity share as you're taking on the second best matchup at the wide receiver position. Puka and Adams dominated against the secondary last week, the two of them combining for 17 receptions, over 200 receiving yards and 2 touchdowns. Troy Franklin, 89 in a touchdown. Ira Manor, 38 in a touchdown. Why not Jakobi Meyers this week with a healthy opportunity share hopefully going in his direction? Number 22 is Tetairoa McMillan. The fact of the matter is, taking on Christian Gonzalez last week was not going to be a cakewalk. We knew it was already going to be a difficult matchup, but this week he has a far softer coverage matchup in my mind, taking on the Miami Dolphins. Again, even though the Dolphins are only giving up 22.8 fantasy points per game thus far this season, it's primarily because when teams have taken on the Miami Dolphins, they're just running the ball against them as they don't have to impose their will within the passing game. But once we have seen, of course, some of these quarterbacks really sling it against the Miami Dolphins. We've seen Michael Pittman Jr., 80 in a touchdown in week 1. Garrett Wilson this most recent week, 82 in a touchdown. Shakir, 45 in a touchdown. Tetairoa McMillan just needs to find himself scoring touchdowns. In terms of opportunity share, in terms of the routes that he's running, in terms of the accuracy of Bryce Young, sure, there's some things that can be improved upon, but everything can be cured if he just starts scoring touchdowns and gets himself red zone opportunities. Number 23, we have Chris Godwin, who's coming off of a week in his first week back in which he played 81% of the offensive snaps, had 10 targets, which again, already kind of gives us the indication that he is going to get himself solid opportunity henceforth for the remainder of the season. And even though he is taking on the 3rd toughest matchup at the wide receiver position, we have seen many of wide receivers find success, like I mentioned earlier with Emeka Egbuka, when we have seen the Seattle Seahawks take on the Cardinals, Saints, the Steelers, and the 49ers. Those offenses only have one primary contributing wide receiver. Marvin Harrison, Olave, Metcalf, and Pearsall, and all 4 of them have played well. Now that you throw 2 threats in the form of Egbuka and Godwin at this defense, expect for a lot of potential for success, especially now that Chris Godwin is continuing to build himself some momentum in the coming weeks. Number 24 is Zay Flowers. Look, we know that Lamar Jackson is most likely going to miss, and Cooper Rush last season filled in for Dak Prescott as the starting quarterback of the Dallas Cowboys for the second half of the season. And in those games with CeeDee Lamb, continue to give CeeDee Lamb the same volume of overall opportunity targets on a per weekly basis as Dak Prescott was. And in fact, it led to Lamb not losing any sort of fantasy value on a weekly basis. So we're hoping that's going to be the case for Zay Flowers, who over the course of this season thus far has been the number 1 receiving option of this offense, and we're hoping it's going to continue to be the case. This week they are taking on Houston at home, and of course we want to avoid Stingley and Lassiter in terms of one-on-one matchups. Hopefully they'll go ahead and they'll put Zay Flowers in the slot position, and they'll leave, Rashad Bateman and DeAndre Hopkins on the outside in a negative game script so they can go ahead and target Zay Flowers 8+ times within the upcoming matchup, which again, I expect those numbers to be consistent with Cooper Rush. Number 25, we have Jameson Williams. Look, the Lions as of right now are 10-point favorites on the road in Cincinnati. The fact of the matter is we have seen the Cincinnati Bengals give up the 10th most points to opposing wide receivers, and this seems like one of those games in which the Lions put up probably over 30 points as they have done that in each of the last 3 games, but potentially even 40, maybe even 50 points. This could be one of those games where they score 6 or 7 touchdowns. That's very much so within the realm of possibility. And if they're going to do so, Jameson Williams should be implicated to have himself a relatively big week. It only takes one given play for Jameson Williams to make his entire fantasy week anyway, with a 40, 50, 60-yard receiving touchdown, even rushing on the table. But as of right now, I think he has himself a lot of upside based on the matchup and the expectation of this team scoring a bunch of points. Stefon Diggs is a number 26. Over the course of the last couple of weeks, I've told you guys via the live streams that we're going to slowly but surely see the ramp up of Stefon Diggs. Hopefully, now that we've had a first 4 weeks kind of presented, he's going to get himself the full unleashed package going against the Buffalo Bills, a rival of his, in a revenge game. Last season, he took on the Buffalo Bills as a member of the Houston Texans. In that game, 6 catches for 82 receiving yards, 11.2 fantasy points. He's coming off of a game of 6 catches and 101 receiving yards. A lot of deep plays down the field. Obviously, the offensive line keeping the quarterback protected in the form of Drake May, which allowed for Stefon Diggs to find a lot of success. But ultimately, in a game in which they're probably going to be in a negative game script, I'm hoping for Stefon Diggs to continue to expand within his role in this offense. Number 27, we have Jordan Addison. In his first week back, playing 96% of the offensive snaps is a ridiculous number, but that just goes to show just how implicated he is within this offense. So if we know that he's going to continue to play upwards of 90% of the offensive snaps, and he's never going to leave the field. Expect for him to clear and away be the number 2 receiving option of this offense. And when you're taking on a defense like the Cleveland Browns that are giving up 26 fantasy points to wide receivers on a per game basis, have a solid run stop defense, have a solid pass rush, obviously expect for Carson Wentz to get the ball out of his hands quickly this week against the matchup against Cleveland, in which they are looking in the direction of Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison. Addison made majority of his fantasy contributions last week on one singular play, but I think as we progress, as he continues to build his rapport with Carson Wentz, it will continue to lead to more success. Number 28, we have Brian Thomas Jr. Look, this is the fact of the matter. He is not playing well. The offense is not predicated on getting him looks as often as we may have expected this offseason, and he is functioning at a wide receiver 3 capacity for fantasy purposes. Therefore, we will approach him as such, leaving him as our number 28. They take on Kansas City. It's a potentially good matchup in the event in which you are given ample opportunity in a negative game script. We'll have to wait and see. Of course, the Jacksonville Jaguars for majority of this season have played from up front and have ran the ball incredibly well considering how well the offensive line and Travis Etienne have played. Therefore, if they continue to maintain leads, it will lead to less opportunity for Brian Thomas going forward. But in a negative game script, you never know. McConkey is at number 29. Speaking of another underwhelming receiver, look, this is one of the better matchups at the wide receiver position, the 8th best to be exact. I mean, as of right now, they're giving up 28.48 fantasy points per game. We have seen many of wide receivers find success, but not many of them from the slot position. McConkey, as of right now, is the number 3 receiving option within this offense behind Keenan Allen and Quentin Johnston. That has been established for 4 consecutive weeks, and we'll have to just buy in on that idea. Am I completely benching him every single week? Well, when we have 4 teams on bye, many of us don't have the opportunity to bench a player that we know who has incredible talent. Just isn't being given the ample opportunity share that he once was last season. Nonetheless, sits at my number 29 in hopes that of which he will be able to have himself a bounce back performance here for weeks to come. Number 30, we have Jerry Jeudy. With the quarterback swap from Joe Flacco to Dylan Gabriel, we're going to hope that this is going to help because ultimately Jerry Jeudy has been a non-factor for 4 consecutive weeks. Now, with Cedric Tillman also going to the injured reserve with a hamstring injury, this provides Jerry Jeudy, David Njoku, and Harold Fannin Jr. with even more receiving opportunity. The only way to beat a Minnesota Vikings defense, especially considering how much pressure, that defense specifically dials up, my expectation is for Dylan Gabriel to get the ball out of his hands incredibly quickly and hopefully be looking in the direction of Jerry Jeudy for far more target opportunity this week. Let's move on to our number 31, Wan'Dale Robinson. Speaking of getting the ball out of your hands quickly and hopefully in the direction of your slot receiving option, we have Wan'Dale Robinson, who of course is going to benefit from the unfortunate nature of the Malik Neighbors ACL injury on Sunday. Again, I mentioned this on the waiver wire episode in case he was available. Over the course of the 2024 season, in the 2 games in which Wan'Dale Robinson played without Malik Neighbors in the lineup, he got 20 total targets in 2 games. 11 receptions, 86 yards and a touchdown, had averaged 10 fantasy points per game and a half PPR without Malik Neighbors. We're hoping for much of the same. I know that the quarterback is still trying to build himself a rapport within this offense, but the Saints matchup, 13th best at the position. Shakir scored, JSN scored, Jennings scored, Marvin Harrison scored. Why not Wan'Dale Robinson and or Darius Slayton this week? Khalil Shakir, speaking of him scoring against the New Orleans Saints last week, coming off of back-to-back games, in fact, of scoring a receiving touchdown. We're always looking to try to get a piece of one of the better offenses in the National Football League. And in the form of the Buffalo Bills, it's Josh Allen, of course, James Cook, Khalil Shakir, and Dalton Kincaid. Those are the only valuable fantasy prospects. And in the form of Khalil Shakir, once again this week, we are firing him up at a top 30 capacity because, of course, he continues to be the number 1 receiving option of this offense outside of a Dalton Kincaid, who comes away with 1 receiving touchdown, and that's it last week. Doesn't really do much else. This team is very much so run heavy because they are leading from up front. In the event in which New England can go ahead and push them to the limit, it could be an exciting matchup. But as long as the Buffalo Bills continue to score as much as they have, expect for Khalil Shakir to continue his implicated opportunities within this offense. Our number 33 is Darius Slayton. Last season, in the 2 games in which he played without Malik Neighbors, 11 targets in both games. So again, that opportunity share, incredible. Again, you're taking on the Saints defense that have given up touchdowns to Shakir, JSN, Jennings, Marvin Harrison. I mean, we have seen Darius Slayton, even going back to the end of the 2023 season, in the final 3 games of that year, found himself a lot of fantasy success when he was given ample opportunity. That is all he is required. He has a captain's patch for a reason. He's been with his organization for a while, and now that he's given the opportunity to contribute at a higher level, he will be able to deliver for fantasy purposes against the Saints. Number 34, we have T. Higgins. Look, the fact of the matter is, it will take a deep shot down the field to go ahead and make him fantasy relevant. But it only takes one play for T. Higgins. And hopefully he and Jake Browning can get on the same page. And hopefully the offensive line can give Jake Browning enough time to be able to cork an arm punt and throw it in the direction of T. Higgins, in which he can come down with a huge play. That's what we're hoping for in a negative game script at home against Detroit. Hopefully able to make some noise in the second half of this contest. Number 35 is DeVonta Smith. Again, he has incredible volumes of talent, but the issue is he doesn't get incredible volumes of target opportunity. Coming off of a week of 2 targets, 2 receptions, 29 yards, the fact of the matter is we are hoping that the Denver Broncos take an early lead that will force the Eagles to have to throw the ball for the majority of the second half, just in the same way in which the Rams forced for Jalen Hurts to throw the ball a bunch in the second half of that Week 3 contest, which finally gave DeVonta Smith some fantasy value. The final player I wanted to mention on today's episode is Terry McLaurin. Just want to go ahead and mention it first and foremost. In the event in which he is active this week, you fire him up. As to where I'll have him ranked, in the event in which he's active and he gets himself a full participation of practice by at least Friday, I would probably have him just behind Zay Flowers, so probably as my number 35 and shove everybody down one slot. But we're going to continue to monitor this with Jaden Daniels coming back, with Deebo Samuel looking as great as he has, as this offense has functioned without Daniels, still at a high, kind of clip in terms of scoring, whether it's on the ground, through the air. You're getting back Sam Cosmi, one of their starting offensive tackles. This offense will continue to improve. Fingers crossed that he's available to play for us, for many of us who are, of course, dealing with injuries and bye weeks this week. All right, that's going to cover it for me today. The final thing I wanted to mention, for those of you guys who want my all-encompassing rankings, every single week, every Thursday, every Sunday. Of course, want to ask me any and all fantasy football related questions, and of course, get exclusive Patreon only Discord server access. You can check out the Patreon. There's a link down in the description. Thank you everybody for watching. I'll be back later tonight live streaming on the channel, so if you have any questions, be sure to swing on by. And until next time, I'll see you guys. Peace.